How lovely indeed. This week, on November 2nd, the Roman Catholic Church commemorates All Souls Day. It is a day to recognize the faithful departed and pray for those whose souls are in purgatory. And the day before is All Saints' Day, remembering all saints, known and unknown. The vigil the night before is known as All Hallows' Eve, or Halloween in our modern English. And even before the advent of Christianity, Europeans honored the dead at this time of year. It was believed that the veil between life and death was thinnest at this time of year. And this is a mystic experience. A mystic experience is anything when opposites merge. Life and death, good and evil, yourself and the universe. Past and future merge into an eternal now, who was and is and evermore shall be. These mystic experiences arise out of the paradoxes we all experience. We know we're alive, and we know we all will die. We know we're individuals, but yet we're connected to one another. Most of the time, we live in our rational mind, bouncing between these polar opposites, pretending that we won't die or planning for our death. Logic is binary. It tells us that something is this or it is that. Like a coin that is either heads or tails. But life doesn't fit into these neat categories. The mystic experience is when logic slips away, where we see both sides of the coin at once. Furthermore, it's like being inside the coin and looking out. Emerson once described himself as being a transparent eyeball. The idea of seeing clearly and being seen clearly through. Some people experience these states often, some never at all. The special music today was from Brahms' German Requiem. And he did something unique. He departed from the traditional liturgical form which seeks to appease the judgmental God. Instead of a section called Kyrie eleison, or Lord have mercy, he selects a different text. How lovely is thy dwelling place, O Lord! My soul fainteth. Instead of emphasizing the gulf that separates humans and God, he emphasized living with God, a merging of the human and divine, moving from a more authoritarian to a more mystical approach. I had a similar transition when I was young. At age 15, when my mother was dying, I lay in my bed, praying and crying, unable to sleep, scared that my world was coming to an end. And then something happened. My Christian upbringing told me it was a hug from God. My later degree in psychology would tell me that it was a cathartic release. But it was really beyond words. It was an overwhelming feeling that death was okay. The very worst thing in life was okay. And I remember living on a different plane for about a month. My grandfather died 3 weeks after my mother. And I remember visiting my grandmother the day he died, and she sat reclined in a chair, and I could see her as an old woman, weary from losing her oldest child and her husband in a 3-week period. But I also could see the young girl that she was. And I thought, what a strange experience. And I remember people worrying about me because I was the youngest in the family. And I was thinking, don't they realize that death is not terrible? Grief and joy are commingled. You cannot miss someone when they're inside you. I learned a truth that is hard to express this day. Everything I've said up to this point is really inadequate to what I was experiencing. The veil between life and death is very thin. One is not good, one is not bad. They both just are. The paradox and the mystical experience may be the source of religious expression across the world. But is it just human imagination, or is it something more? Is it just a delusion to help us cope with the fear of death? I bring your attention to a book entitled Why God Won't Go Away by Andrew Newberg, Eugene Dacquil, and Vince Krauss. In the 19th century, and even before the Enlightenment, God was pretty much defined as anything we can't explain. God brought the rain, God created the earth, and then as science grew and chipped away at all the things that were suddenly explainable, there was a feeling that once we become rational, all this God stuff will just fall away. Nietzsche declared that God is dead. Over 100 years ago, but God's still here in the minds of most of humanity. So what happens? What is the tenaciousness of God? These scientists did brain scans on Buddhist monks and Franciscan nuns as they entered into mystical states. And they found decreased blood flow to the right posterior superior parietal lobe, which they dubbed the orientation association area. In other words, the part of the brain that orients us to time and space decreases in function during mystical experiences. So, subjects report a mystical experience where they merge with eternity and the universe. This subjective experience corresponds with what is actually happening in their brain. In other words, religious people throughout history just weren't making this stuff up. The reports of Buddhists, Sufis, Christian mystics comes from an experience. People really, at times, experience being one with everything, or in Christian terms, merging with the Godhead. But are these experiences real, or are they just an illusion? First, we have to deal with our definition of real, because our brain constructs our reality. It helps us interpret the external world, creating a concept of objectivity. We create descriptions that other individuals come to agree on. We can come together and decide that the sky is blue. And each person aligns their experience to the social concept of blueness. But we can't know if each person experiences blueness in the same way. In fact, we have evidence that we do not. I look out in this audience. Some people like blue and some do not. Our individual experience of so-called objective reality varies from person to person. Now, our ability to label things is a benefit to our species. It facilitates communication and survival. But we must always remember our labels are mental constructions and not the reality itself. Subjective reality is even fuzzier. Each of us perceives some level of self. We create a concept of this self that is separate from our brain. We have this concept of mind, which is distinct from the mechanical operation of gray matter. But any concept of self is dependent on neurological function. Yet we still see ourselves separate from our brains. We say things like, my mind is playing tricks on me, or I got lost in thought. Well, these statements are physiologically impossible because any concept of me is contained in my thoughts. Any concept of myself is in my mind. They are part of brain functioning. They can't get lost in each other because they're sitting there living with each other. Yet we perceive that they're real and true. We believe that our mind can play tricks on us and that we can get lost in our thoughts. So when the mystics say that they are perceiving a higher plane of reality, are they perceiving something that actually exists, or is it just a mind trick? Now, if the subjective self and objective reality are concepts constructed by the mind, they could be classed as artificial. So the mystics that strip away all artifice might be in touch with a deeper reality. I want you to listen to some of the words from different mystics from around the world. The Sufi, Hallaj Hussein ibn Mansur. I am he whom I love, and he who I love is I. We are two separate spirits dwelling in one body. If thou seest me, thou seest him. And if thou seest him, thou seest us both. Meister Eckhart, Christian, wrote, How then am I to love the Godhead? Thou shalt not love him as he is, not as God, not as spirit, not as person, not as image, but sheer, pure one. And into this one we sink from nothing to nothing. So help us God. And Lao Tzu in the Tao wrote, Ordinary people hate solitude, but the Master makes use of it, embracing aloneness, realizing oneness with the whole universe. And Black Elk of the Oglala Nation wrote, Peace comes within the souls of men when they realize their oneness with the universe. And even Einstein sought this unitary theory. He wrote, The individual feels the nothingness of human desires and aims and the sublimity and marvelous order that reveal themselves both in nature and in the world of thought. He looks upon existence as some sort of prison and wants to experience the universe as a single, significant whole. Ultimate unity is something humans have experienced across time and cultures. It's an intuitive longing that words cannot describe, which is one of the major problems with religion. Religions attempt to put this into words. All these things that cannot be expressed. All theologies are approximations of a reality beyond perception. Everything gets lost in translation. every description of the ultimate is imperfect. Now, people are very good at pointing out the imperfections in other people's religions, but they cling to their own very tightly. And this results in war, strife, and disunity. One way that religions deal with the ineffable quality is to use ritual that goes beyond words. We light a chalice and candles at joy and concerns. We share flowers. We sing. Even the atheists among us feel the transcendent glory of the Hallelujah chorus. A mind might be saying these words, Lord of Lords and King of Kings, forever, forever. But they're just mere vehicles to take us to the transcendence of that music. Other traditions make use of incense, chanting, and body movements to take a person beyond themselves. In our services, I enjoy that moment at the end, after we've all joined hands and before we say our closing words. It's a silent, physical representation of unity. And sometimes when I enjoy that moment for more than 3 seconds, some other voice will begin the words, "Let us go in peace." And that interruption may jar me for a millisecond, but then I get swept up in the sound of the unison voices and the subtle hand squeeze that is at the end of our liturgy. Our brain is capable of experiencing unity beyond our normal objectivity. And this is what the majority of humanity has labeled God. And while the labels differ from culture to culture, perhaps there is a common humanity that is united with the universe. There is a unity that transcends our differences. One does not need to be a Christian to appreciate the Hallelujah chorus. One does not need to be a scientist to be moved by images from the Hubble telescope. One does not need to be a pagan to sense the awe of nature. And one does not need to be a Hindu to feel the benefits of yoga. Our biology is more than rational. It allows us to move beyond the polarities of us and them, of the observer and the observed. The veil between life and death disappears. What we know merges with the unknown. That is religion, and that is part of the human condition. Religion cannot be reasoned away because religion is not reasonable. It may be biological. It affects us on different levels. Our own mind contradicts itself. We cannot escape the paradox of being separate yet connected. And so I'm going to open the floor up to you and ask, if you're willing to share, have you had an experience of reality that transcends ordinary reality? Is it helpful to call it God or something else? Are we on? We're coming on? Okay, great. Or any other things that you might be thinking of this morning.
I remember a weekend several years ago there was a huge meteor shower, and I remember this weekend, the whole weekend was a perfect weekend. And I remember during the weekend, I never felt alone or by myself. Even if I was alone or by myself, I felt connected to everything the whole weekend, and there was just this feeling of joy and happiness. And I think that when we have those moments of emotional intensity, that's what brings on that connection with everything, with oneness. Yeah.
Thank you.
I had an experience similar growing up in South Carolina, where we didn't have much snow. When I was a student in France, and my friends wanted me to go and try to learn how to ski, which I never really did, but I took the car up to the highest peak, where they then left and went down the mountain, and there was nobody but me up there, and it was so high, and it was so quiet, and it was like that business of just one. That's all it is.
Transcendentalism. Gotta get the person behind you and then you.
I was thinking about music when you were talking about that, and I always feel like when I'm singing, if I'm into it the right way or whatever, or when I'm listening to something, that music makes it's like the space between what we're feeling and what we can't articulate or something. It's like this magical thing.
I think I was just wondering as to why everybody was so quiet. And I think, from my point of view, is because I always consider myself so rational that maybe I don't allow myself to experience that sort of thing.
Because it is a loss of control.
And certainly, this is why a lot of people, young people especially, have taken various agents, acting agents, to get in this state of mind so that they can experience it as a shortcut to this, instead of having to, let's say, starve yourself out in the wilderness for several days to become hallucinatory. It's much easier with a little tablet of acid to do it. And these experiences are quite real to the people who take them, and they will stand by them for many years.
Yes, they will.
I remember with the birth of my second son, I began to hemorrhage after he was born, and they didn't realize what was happening, and I started losing consciousness. And I thought angels had come for me. And there was an angel that was standing at my bed and waved for me to come. It was time for me to go. And at first I went, and I remember walking down this hall, and all of a sudden I stopped and I said, I can't go with you. I have a little boy. And I was okay with leaving my newborn because my newborn didn't know me yet. But I had a 4-year-old. I said, I can't leave my 4-year-old. And I stopped and I said, I'm sorry if I have just shaken up my destiny and I'll be stuck here on earth. That's where I'll be. And I turned around and I walked back into my body, and they were trying to bring me, back, and they were hooking me up, and, I can't explain that moment. I don't know if angels really came to get me or not. It's just one of those things.
It felt real.
I have a bunch of thoughts, and I don't know if I can get them organized, but as a neurologist, you think about this, and I've read the book that you talked about, and a few others along those lines, and it suggests that some of these experiences really are neurologic deficits, okay? Something where the brain isn't working right,
because we have decreased blood flow. They're talking about near-death experiences. There's a lot of research into that, and recent experiments and research suggests that, again, that's a neurologic deficit's probably in that parietal area. So you could, come at it from a very materialistic kind of approach and say, well, that's all it is, so, why bother with it? But my perspective is, I guess, probably more like yours, that, yeah, maybe it's just a neurologic deficit, but so what? It's out there and affects, we are hardwired that way. Most of us probably are hardwired that way, that these kinds of experiences affect us in that way. And that doesn't mean it's not proof of God's existence, but it is proof that humanity probably needs these feelings, and that they're rewarding to us.
To me, it's often just a matter of surrender or letting go. I think you can do it in meditation. I think there's several different portals to this, but you have to allow the mind to release itself and to allow yourself to move into a transcendent situation. So that's how I see it.
Oddly enough, the big out atheist, I used to have very out-of-body experiences when I was a child, and it would happen a lot, and I really, really, really disliked it. And I just said, enough, I don't want to experience that. I will not experience that. And when I would feel it come on, I would reject it. And I really believe that I was able to stop that experience. And it may be why, as I say, God is the green 13, I don't see it. I just don't want to experience that. I don't like that loss of control. I don't want to give that up to anything else, and I refuse to do it. So I think that it's kind of like what Diane was just saying. You have to be open to let that happen. Well, I just wasn't comfortable with it.
I've had some of these experiences. One time when I was in a coma, I had a very strange experience where I saw someone who I knew was on some level. I don't know if I was conscious or what, but I knew that he was probably there visiting me, or he might have been there at some point. But I don't know if this was real or not. And I just felt this overwhelming sense of gratitude, that he was there for me. And that's just one example. And, of course these only come from inside your head, but that doesn't make it any less real. And it doesn't make it God or anything outside yourself either. I'm an atheist too. I think sometimes, I don't think the scary dissociative experiences that some kids might have, and some people might have who are seriously disturbed, I don't think that's the same thing. But I think we need to get away from trying to pin this down and saying it is or isn't God or whatever.
Yeah. Get a couple more on.
You mentioned the temporal lobe, Charlie, but I think most of your congregation, especially the men, are stuck in the gyrus fornicatus.
If you would like to read kind of a summary of Searching for God in the Brain, of summarizing the current research, it's in Scientific American Mind that just came out. It's in the October-November 2007 issue. So it is very interesting, I think, and it's summarized in this particular, a lot of the research in the current issue of Scientific American Mind.
I've been on several week-long retreats with some Jungian folks up in Canoga, where there's lots of trees and beautiful water, and Brian Swim was there, and they've had other people who talk about the expanding consciousness of the universe. And so I've been blessed to be under the wings of some really neat people. That's when I started falling in love with trees and finding that you could actually hold one. I was told by my spiritual director to hold one until you could feel it. And I was holding and waiting for like the xylem and phloem. I thought it would be up and down. I didn't know what he meant. And I have a honey locust who puts roots out far into the parts of the yard. And I can feel her hugeness. And then after some more time, I would just lay outside on Mother Earth and just look at the sky. And so one night I was just lying, enjoying, feeling close. And then the clouds came down low. It was like a blanket. And then time went away, and I was just lying there with noticing things began to stop, and then things did stop, and I was just one. And that experience changed my life, and I wrote a little poem. Now the sky hangs down low, and the trees are my friends, and I am just a little pebble on God's beach.
Thank you for sharing your experiences. I know some of those were very personal. Let us continue to have these conversations, and at this point, let us sing that transcendent quality of music. And this is a song that's to be done with gusto. The more you follow the notes, the less you'll get a sense of the song.